Alright class, I appreciate all of the positive feedback on the intro I made for the previous lecture, so to show my appreciation, I've gone ahead and made another. Roll the intro.
Psych!
I'm sure by now you all know how these lectures go, so to avoid giving the same spiel I give at the beginning of every one, here's a brief summary. South Park is controversial, they almost started a war, took down Scientology, said a racial slur 42 times, and got themselves banned in China. But today we're talking about a unique case, because this episode wasn't actually all that controversial. Don't get me wrong, as is the case with every episode of South Park, there were certainly people that were upset, but this episode did much more than just piss people off. In fact, an argument could be made for this being the single most influential episode in the whole show. You see, the release of this episode would not only expose the general public to something they had never seen on TV before, but in doing so, they would single-handedly change the television landscape forever, at least in the US. Now, you may be asking, what could they have possibly said to make such a significant impact on television as a whole? Shit. Yeah, that's kind of an anticlimactic answer by today's standards. I mean, there's plenty of TV shows who use words like that pretty regularly, but have you ever wondered when this became the norm? Before the late 90s, this type of language simply didn't exist on television. I mean, on network television, airing anything considered obscene is literally a violation of federal law. So what exactly changed? Well, in the late 90s, there were a few shows that attempted to push the envelope a bit, and in doing so, they cracked open the door for others. In 2001, two dudes who make a cartoon on cable television saw this crack as an opportunity and decided to demolish the entire wall along with the door like the Kool-Aid Man after a night out with Escobar. These dudes go by the name of Matt Stone and Trey Parker, and by releasing the season 5 premiere of South Park entitled It Hits the Fan, they would not only force their way into the history books of television, but also leave their mark on the year as a whole, creating what is undoubtedly the craziest story to come out of the year 2001. Oh, wait. So what? South Park said shit on TV. They weren't the first to do it. What made this episode so special? Well, they didn't just say shit on TV. They said it 162 times. Uncensored. In a 22-minute episode. But how did they do it? How could they possibly take a word that was essentially banned from being spoken on television at all and get away with saying it so much? Well, with the intro out of the way, let's get into it. This is that time South Park changed television forever. Also, real quick, this isn't a sponsor, I just wanted to give a shout out to the South Park Archives Wiki. It's a resource I use for literally every single video I make. If it didn't exist, I probably wouldn't even be talking to you right now. But I wanted to mention it because they recently made a move to a different website. Their new URL is southpark.wiki.gg. They literally have every single piece of information you could ever want about South Park on that website, so seriously, go support them, go check that out if you have any interest in South Park. I seriously would not be able to do what I do without them, so if possible, spread the word to anyone you think might be interested. I put a link in the description. It's southpark.wiki.gg. And yeah, now we can get into the video. First, I want to give a brief history of profanity on television so that we can better understand just how much of a game changer this episode was. Let's start by talking about the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC. The FCC is an independent agency of the US government that regulates broadcasting, stuff like television and radio. They're basically the ones who determine what can and can't be said on TV. They've been in charge since 1965, and under their regulations, it's a violation of federal law to air anything obscene, indecent, or profane at any time. Now, my first thought when reading this is, if I had to pick 3 words to describe South Park, it would be those. But we'll come back to that in a bit. The most noteworthy violation of these rules came in 1973, when the late great George Carlin performed his infamous stand-up routine, 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television. In the routine, he discusses these words and the absurdity of the regulation of them. The first word on the list is the one that's most relevant to the topic of this video. You see, the real issue of this routine came when it was broadcast on a radio station. The FCC would take the broadcasting company, Pacifica, to court over this matter, as they claimed it violated their regulations. For time's sake, I'm going to make this part brief, but it's an insane story and one of the most important cases in US history in regards to freedom of speech, so if it interests you, I suggest you check out this video by Weird History. The case eventually went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the court would rule in the FCC's favor. With this decision, the court had essentially solidified Carlin's 7 words as the list of words that couldn't be said on TV, since the FCC regulations never cite any specific words. Now, it's safe to say that the US wasn't exactly the most most progressive nation in the late 20th century, so these regulations were very rarely questioned. But all of that changed in the 80s when cable channels first started gaining some traction. You see, there's two main types of TV stations, network and cable. If you're around my age or younger, you might not even know the difference, so here's a quick explanation. Basically, network TV refers to broadcast networks. These are channels that you could pick up with an antenna for free without paying for cable. Channels like NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, all of these are considered network television. Cable channels, on the other hand, are subscription services. Channels like ESPN, FX, History, or Comedy Central. Now, obviously I knew this, but what I didn't know is that because these channels aren't technically broadcast networks, they don't have to follow the same regulations as the network stations. The FCC's rules don't apply to them, so in theory, they can say whatever they want. Of course, in practice, it wasn't nearly that simple. Most cable television is funded by advertisers, and because of the culture at the time of Americans being accustomed to squeaky clean television, these channels weren't so quick to start using any kind of serious profanity out of fear of their advertisers dropping them. Man, what a joke. Can you imagine willingly censoring yourself out of fear of losing advertisers? How ridiculous. Oh, wait. But there were also different types of cable channels, such as HBO, whose business model was to charge the viewers a subscription service directly instead of relying on advertisers. This meant that they could actually say whatever they wanted, and they absolutely did. They pretty much built their entire brand on this. Channels like this basically invented the model that streaming services would perfect. But as cable grew over time, so too did the amount of swearing on TV. Now, up until the late 90s, these basic cable channels would still limit themselves to the words that most adults would barely even consider profane. Words like damn or ass or even occasionally bitch. They would never even think to air any of those 4-letter words, even though they technically could if they wanted to. Network television was even more restrictive, having to abide by the FCC regulations. Pretty much any swearing that had occurred on network TV was the result of accidents or rogue celebrities on live shows, or even special educational exceptions like Scared Straight. And it was pretty much unheard of for any scripted shows to have any kind of swearing. That is, until 1993, when NYPD Blue aired on ABC. This show really pushed the limits of what was allowed on network TV, following cable's lead and sticking to the rather tame expletives. At this time, the FCC was loosening up a bit. They were a lot less likely to pursue any obscene or profane language, assuming they stuck to this more PG-13 form of swearing. That is, until 1999, when Chicago Hope would become the first scripted network television show to use one of the 4-letter words uncensored. Hello, echoey editor Blooms here. This is the part where I was going to put the clip in the video, but the clip isn't on YouTube and I wasn't about to watch 40 minutes of a medical drama just to find this clip, but just know he says shit happens. Again, a little anticlimactic by today's standards, but at the time, this was a big deal. In a shocking turn of events, Western society did not immediately crumple at the hands of such horrid profanity being muttered on air. In fact, the FCC didn't even receive any complaints about it, so they let it slide. The worst that came from it was some local channels choosing to censor it themselves since the show aired early and they were afraid children might see it. But other than that, nothing happened. In fact, the show was praised for it since it emphasized the grittiness of the drama. Now, this didn't immediately open the floodgates for S&F bombs to be dropped on TV. In fact, I couldn't find any examples of any other shows using the word uncensored in the 2 years following this episode, and even if they did, no show would dare to say it more than once or twice. But as I mentioned, it cracked open the door for others. And watching all of this unfold from the shadows were the two aforementioned dudes with their own cartoon. They found the whole situation pretty ridiculous, and they saw the light spilling out of the crack in that door. They knew exactly what they needed to do, so they began plotting. And about 2 years later, they were finally ready to strike.
They're gonna say, shit.
The episode opens with Kyle being excited about going to see The Lion King on stage, but the others aren't nearly as stoked on it as he is. Cartman comes up, matching Kyle's energy, and we get one of the greatest Kyle comebacks of all time.
Oh my god, you guys! What, Doughboy? I was just...
Cartman informs the boys that the legendary TV show Cop Drama is going to say something that's never been said in the history of television.
They're gonna say shit on television? You can't say shit on television. It was just on the news. People are freaking out, dude.
A counter then appears in the bottom left corner of the screen that increases every time the word shit is said. And by the end of the episode, the counter will be in the triple digits. Kyle is pretty annoyed by this since everyone cares way more about that than going to see The Lion King on stage with him, calling it immature and stupid.
Jeez, you're a little irritable, Kyle. What's the matter? You got some sand in your vagina?
We then cut to Randy at his work, you know, back when he was a geologist and life was good before everything changed. Anyways, he plans a watch party with his co-workers at the bar because this is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. Kyle decides to ask Butters to go see The Lion King with him, but Butters has to stay home to watch cop drama with his parents since they're worried he might take it the wrong way.
How many ways are there to take it? It's just a stupid word.
This is kinda unrelated, but every time I go back and watch old South Park, specifically anything like season 8 or below, I'm always shocked by the pacing. In modern South Park, the pacing is relatively normal, the conversations are more natural feeling, and they take their time setting up jokes, but in older South Park, they moved at breakneck speeds. The characters respond to each other so quickly, their dialogue is damn near overlapping at times. They make a joke, and before you even have time to digest it, they're on to the next thing. The crazy thing is, by this point, they had already started slowing down the pace of the show. The episodes before season 5 were even faster paced. It's one of those interesting little details you notice when you go back and watch the older stuff, and it's something I kinda missed in the newer episodes. So cop drama is finally airing, and people across the nation are eagerly gathered around their TVs to make sure they don't miss this piece of history.
We have to know where that evidence was shipped.
Oh, was that it? Was that it?
Shipped. He said shipped.
They finally say the word, and it's just as impactful as everyone thought it would be.
You've got some shit on the side of your mouth right there. Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks.
Wow.
Kyle is still very annoyed by the whole situation, claiming that this changes absolutely nothing. It's just a word after all. I mean, what could possibly come from this situation?
It's still the same old world out there, look.
What a weird coincidence. The local news anchor discusses what was said on cop drama and how now it's totally okay to say. He also discusses how a virus has suddenly appeared that's causing people to vomit their intestines up, which their reporter happens to fall victim to.
Whoa, shit.
Also, I really love how they animated this scene. For some reason, those like 4 frames of him completely normal before dying are hilarious to me. I love South Park's older, more crude animation style. It made for some hilarious visual gags that we just don't see with the newer, cleaner animation, and it's something I'm considering making a video about in the future, so stay tuned. Back at school, Miss Chokesondik explains to the students that the word is now appropriate to be used in school in certain contexts. This scene is funny because it's something you don't really think about when watching TV, but the examples she uses are actually true. You can use the same word in one context and it'd be totally okay, but in a different context, it's not. You can go and watch any show that airs on TV and you realize that for the most part, they follow these rules. It's one of those things that you kind of realize subconsciously, but you're not fully aware of it, and now that you know, you'll notice it in everything.
That's a shitty picture of me is now fine. However, the literal noun form of this is a picture of shit is still naughty.
Kyle is still annoyed by all of this, and Cartman continues to egg him on.
Don't mind Kyle, everyone. He's just got a little sand in his vagina. There's no sand in my vagina!
Even Timmy gets in on the fun. Mr. Garrison discusses the same rules with the kindergartners, and as an example, he discusses how, since he's gay, he can say a specific word that's not typically allowed on TV.
That means that now I can say the word fag. On television, they usually don't allow fag.
I love the fourth wall break that we get here with Garrison looking directly at the camera every time he says it. I think it's pretty funny. But now the whole town is getting in on it. I mean, if it's okay to say on TV, it's okay to say everywhere. And our convenient little counter really starts to climb as Mr. Mackey takes us over the 50 mark. But the sharp increase in usage of this word seems like it might correlate with these strange events going on. The reign of frogs, this weird new disease, it all seems a little too coincidental. The mystery is only added to when we see a group of knights break free of their stone prisons. I'm sure they won't be important at all. Stan and Cartman stand out front of a shop that has some rather unsubtle merch, where they discuss how the word is getting kind of boring to use. Cartman agrees, and he suggests some new words that they could use instead.
Cock and fuck and meat crab. What's meat crab? You know, that stuff you get as an appetizer at Thai food restaurants?
Meanwhile, Kyle begins to put the pieces together, noticing how coincidental it is that this sickness suddenly started right when people started using the word more. He did some research and discovered that the word first started being used in English at the same time the Black Plague wiped out half of Europe. Coincidence?
Oh, Kyle, you are so full of meat crab. I am not full of meat crab. What?
We then see the network executives discussing how their ratings have soared since this marketing scheme, as well as their new, super creative marketing scheme.
We're going to say shit twice.
The boys then go to the place they always go when they know they need help with something.
Hello there, children.
Hey, Chef.
I miss him so much. Chef takes them to a library where they research the connection between the plague and the word. They learn that the plague was actually a curse, one that would be brought on by the mass usage of a word of curse.
Word of curse? A curse word.
Cartman is also busy doing his own research and discovers a revelation of his own.
In this Nancy Drew mystery, Nancy goes to the beach and gets sand trapped in her shoe. This could explain how Kyle got it in his vagina.
They also realize that Kenny has the plague, so they're running out of time. They hop on a plane to LA to warn the TV executives, all the while being subtly followed by one of the knights. The executives are busy coming up with their new genius idea, milking every last drop out of their previous one.
And have everyone say shit in place of their written lines. Must shit TV.
When the boys arrive, they are greeted by a corporate spiel and merch to get them to leave. As they leave, the knight breaks into the conference room and decapitates one of the executives, followed by falling out of the window and handing Kyle the rune stone he's holding in his dying breath.
Children, we're going to have to go to the land of castles, knights, and kings.
Inside the casino, they talk to one of the employees, which gave us what is probably my favorite gag in the whole episode.
You know, not every British person knows about wizards and dragons and curses.
This.
A runestone of Gaelic. Where did you get this?
Specifically, the way they instantly change his appearance and voice, this was just hilarious. I love it. He leads them deeper into the casino to the inner sanctum, where they meet the sorcerer and get a giant lore dump. The reason the curse hasn't been activated before is because using the curse words occasionally is okay, but when they're used repeatedly by enough people, the curse activates. The sorcerer identifies the stone as belonging to the mythical knights of standards and practices, who protect against the curse. This is another meta joke that I greatly appreciated, since standards and practices is the department that TV stations have to ensure that everything they're doing is okay to be shown on TV, aka the ones who would stop a show from doing anything obscene or profane, so the naming is very appropriate. The town watches the new HBC special, and they begin to realize that the word isn't really funny anymore, and Garrison says that they can't use his word as a replacement, giving us another meta joke that made me laugh.
So we can't say fag? No, say you got beeped.
I should be able to say fag.
Hey, you didn't get beeped.
Uh-oh.
The sorcerer discusses with the boys the existence of 8 different runestones, one for each of the curse words that cannot be said. You may have noticed that's one more than the 7 Carlin identified, and that's because one of Cartman's personal favorites is included as well.
I knew it. Microb. Microb is a curse word. God must hate it as much as I do.
The stone can be wielded to defeat the evil Geldin, who will destroy the world when the word is said enough times. The knights are busy defending against the curse word, insisting that the executive stops using it.
We are the Royal Order of Standards and Practices. We command you to stop saying the curse word.
Side note, I love how over the top their Scottish accents are. It really makes me laugh. Anyways, but as is the case with most people with a lot of power, being told not to do something only makes them want to do it more, and the executive adds an impressive 35 uses to the counter in about a 10-second span. This turns out to be a pretty big mistake, as the evil Geldin decides he's heard enough and makes his entrance looking like a Dark Souls boss.
Oh,
Luckily, the boys make it just in time with the runestone, and Kyle is able to lift the curse.
Ah, dude, lame, bummer, dude. What a stupid voice.
Kyle and Stan immediately go into one of their trademarked I learned something today speeches, but this one seems a little insincere. He discusses how everyone is saying curse words too much, that they can be dangerous, and they need to be saved for rare circumstances. Cartman even chimes in with his own advice.
So please, everyone, from now on, you've got to try and watch your language.
This, of course, is advice that South Park has absolutely no intentions of following. But with that, the day is saved, and we get a happy ending.
Let's all go home and find a nice white woman to make love to.
Yeah, and Kenny didn't die. Holy poop. I love you guys.
So normally this is the part where I talk about the controversy, outrage, and backlash that came from the episode. In fact, according to Matt and Trey, this episode was one of the few times when they knew that what they were doing was going to piss a lot of people off. So how extreme was the backlash for this one? Well, surprisingly, not very. In fact, there was basically no backlash. No one really seemed to care that much. And it kind of proved the point that they were trying to make, which we'll talk about more later in the video. There was one group that was deeply offended, however, and that would be our old friends over at the Parents Television Council. We've talked about them a few times on this channel, considering their proclivity to attack South Park at every opportunity in the early 2000s. For those who don't know, they're a conservative group that advocates for all TV to be family-friendly and inoffensive, so as you would imagine, South Park got under their skin quite a few times. Their founder, L. Brent Bozell, or as I like to call him, El Bozo, attacked South Park directly after the release of With Apologies to Jesse Jackson, and I have a whole video on that if you're interested. But after Comedy Central aired this horrific piece of vulgar trash, they took a different approach. They decided to essentially email bomb Comedy Central, supposedly writing and sending nearly 5,000 emails in one day to the company complaining about the filth being displayed on their TV screens, which is honestly super impressive. I don't know how many people they had working for them exclusively writing emails, but that is a Herculean task. And the craziest part is this almost worked. You see, the effect that all these emails had on Comedy Central was, well, nothing, but I'm certain that if they had just sent a few more emails, they would have gotten through to them. So yeah, that's pretty much the full extent of the controversy that this episode brought, but that's not the interesting part of the story. What is interesting is the story behind this episode and how the message being sent in the episode influenced television as a whole. So now let's talk about that. So what inspired Matt and Trey to make this episode in the first place? Well, as I briefly mentioned, it all started with Chicago Hope's use of the word in '99. Matt and Trey saw how this was such a big deal, and according to the DVD commentary for this episode, their opinion of this kind of mirrored Kyle's in this episode. They thought it was stupid. I mean, who really cares? It's just a word. They'd been saying much worse stuff on their show for years, they just got censored. Why is this such a big deal? So they came up with a plan to say it a few times in an episode and to have all of the marketing materials surround this. An epic season premiere where they pushed the boundaries unlike anyone else. It was genius. But Comedy Central didn't think so. They said, nope, can't say that word on TV, sorry. This made Matt and Trey kind of upset. They hated this double standard that came with this kind of language. When Chicago Hope said it, they were praised for being innovative, for showing how gritty and dramatic their show actually was by using this coarse language to make it more impactful. It was regarded as genius. But comedy would never get the same treatment.
It was just that thing that always kind of pisses us off where, like, all of a sudden if you're a serious show or you're high art, you can get away with saying shit, but to do it in comedy was kind of too low brow, so they wouldn't let us do it.
This double standard is something that happens all the time in comedy. You can say whatever you want if you're serious and artistic about it, but because it's comedy, it's inherently not serious, and for some reason that makes it not okay. It just plays into this idea that comedy is somehow a lesser art form than any other type of art, which is simply not true. Just because something is comedic doesn't make it any less important or artistic. So Matt and Trey were upset, but they've built their entire brand on doing the things they weren't supposed to do, so they weren't going to take this lying down. They came up with a new idea. The whole reason they've been able to get away with all the stuff they've gotten away with up to this point is because there was always a point to what they were doing. They were never just being offensive to be offensive. They always had a message or attempted to make a statement of some kind. So they approached Comedy Central with a new idea. What if, instead of saying it just a few times, we said it as many times as we possibly could? Then we could make a statement about how ridiculous it is that these words are taboo in the first place. I mean, by the end of the episode, the word will be completely meaningless and our point will have been proven. And somehow, Comedy Central decided to greenlight this idea, which is just further proof that South Park never would have survived on any other network, since I'd bet my life savings not a single other network would ever allow this to happen. So, that's exactly what happened. The show went live, all 162 uses of shit completely uncensored, with an extra 38 written instances of the word for a clean 200. And their point was immediately proven, as this episode was unanimously praised, aside from the whole El Bozo thing we talked about. But what exactly was their point? Well, they make a few points throughout the episode, and I think all of them are kind of interesting. First, and most obviously, it's dumb to place so much weight on a word. Kyle is the one sharing the sentiment throughout the episode the most. He just can't understand why everyone cares so much about a word being said on TV. It's just a word. It's not going to bring about some kind of revolution, and it's not going to be the end of the world. Now, in this case, both of those things actually do happen, but obviously that's to point out how absurd it is that people treat this word with such reverence. They hammer home this idea by repeating the word so many times that it loses all of the impact it once had. By the end of the episode, I stopped even noticing when they said it. The only way your brain even registers it is with the counter, which itself is a comedic way to show its meaning fading in real time. This is the reason the CEO of Comedy Central at the time, Larry Divney, even approved of the episode in the first place. In an interview, he talked about how he refused it, but once they came to him with the idea to say it 162 times, he felt like he had to air it.
I thought about it, I was not going to do it because of this language issue. We can't do that. I said, well,
and a sum total of how many times?
162 times, but it was so satirical, it was so smart. How could we not do it?
And of course, their advertisers agreed to it, which realistically is the most important part. But the final message the episode leaves us on is only half serious, discussing how it's important to curse less often so that these words don't lose their impact. Stan actually has a quote that I found illustrates this point well.
And besides, too much use of a dirty word takes away from its impact. We believe in free speech and all that, but making a few words taboo just adds to the fun of English.
And I find this to be true. Cursing all the time makes cursing inherently less fun. It's an important part of language to have words that are taboo because they can be used to emphasize emotions or situations that need that extra emphasis. And if you say them all the time, that extra emphasis is totally lost. Now, obviously, this is half serious since it's coming from South Park, but the message is one that I agree with. It might not seem like it from my videos, but my vocabulary is pretty obscene. I have my foul-mouthed father to thank for that one. Love you, Dad. But sometimes I wish I didn't use those words as often as I do, because in the moments I really should be using them, it just doesn't hit the same. But regardless, this episode got its point across very well, and in my opinion, it's one of their best. South Park specializes in over-exaggerating and taking things to the extreme to get their point across, and this episode does that flawlessly. The fact that just saying the word on TV means that everyone says the word all the time now, even kids, is a hilarious way to parody this idea that so many people have that just showing something on TV means that it translates into the real world. And of course, the literal world ending just because people are saying a word is a funny way to make fun of these people that designate these words as inherently bad or harmful when in reality, they're literally just words. So now we can finally talk about how this episode really impacted television as a whole. Now you may be thinking that immediately following this episode, there must have been 4-letter words flying around TV like nobody's business. Fuck, shit, cock, cunt, microb. But no. This episode's impact was a little more subtle than that. Following this episode, not much changed in the short term. Sure, there may have been a few more instances of shows using the more vulgar words in the following years, but for the most part, they still avoided it. Even South Park itself, their uses of shit in the following seasons were still censored, just like the episodes before the release of this one. But over time, more and more shows started to test their luck, slipping the 4-letter words in occasionally. I'm sure many of these networks had thoughts along the lines of, well, I mean, they said it 162 times in one episode and faced absolutely no consequences. We can say it once or twice, we'll be fine. And they were fine. More and more of these words began to creep onto television, and every time they came out unscathed. Ironically, Comedy Central itself wouldn't officially allow uncensored uses of shit until over 10 years later. But as the time has passed, the effects of this episode can be seen everywhere. Cursing on adult TV is so common that it's honestly more surprising if an adult show doesn't have at least 1 or 2 4-letter words sprinkled throughout. In fact, at least 3 of Carlin's 7 words are now used on TV pretty regularly. It makes it so interesting to look back at this episode and see just how much things have changed since then. People actually used to get upset about profanity on television. It just seems like such an absurd concept if you weren't there for it. I mean, some basic cable stations will even drop the forbidden F-bomb relatively frequently. AMC and FX let them fly all the time. 25 years ago, I'm sure that many people believed this would never happen, but here we are, profanity on TV getting more and more common every day. There really isn't much that you can't say on TV nowadays. Obviously, the network stations are still beholden to the FCC's regulations, but even they have loosened up quite a bit. And I say all of this to highlight just how impactful this South Park episode was. This episode paved the way for high-level profanity to appear on television. If this episode had never been made, we probably would have still seen cursing on TV, but I'm certain it wouldn't have even been close to the extent that we see now. Now, whether or not this is a good thing is totally up to you. That's not what this is all about. Though, for the record, I'm of the belief that censorship does far more harm than it does good. And if you disagree with that, that's totally fine. That's not the point of this video. The point is that by releasing this episode of South Park, Matt and Trey would pave the way for anyone else to use whatever words they wanted to use in television moving forward, leaving their mark on television for the rest of history. And I think that's pretty cool. And now, hopefully, we all know a little bit more about that time South Park changed television forever.